ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور انفسنا ومن سيئات اعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله. يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى: يا ايها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحده وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والارحام ان الله كان عليكم رقيبا. وفي سورة الأحزاب: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. إن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وأحسن الحديث حديث محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار ثم أما بعد. All praises to Allah. We seek His help and His forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evil of our own souls and from our own bad deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides will never be led astray, and whomsoever Allah leads astray, no one can guide. And I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his slave and his last messenger. Abu Syed and Musalla radiallahu anhu, he narrates a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ calls him after he finishes his prayer. And he asks him, shall I not tell you the greatest surah in the Quran? And of course, Abu Syed, he says, yes, please tell me, Rasulullah. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he says that the surah is the 7 often repeatedly recited verses, referencing Surah Al-Fatiha. And we know that Surah Al-Fatiha holds a great place in Islam, that Surah Al-Fatiha is a surah that no salah is complete without, that Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala said that if you were to combine the entire Quran and you were to try to summarize it, then Surah Al-Fatiha would be your best chapter. And Surah Al-Fatiha is a conversation between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A conversation that begins with the hamd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin. And then we move on to acknowledging the need that we have for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. And then we end off the surah with the dua. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us on the straight path. Sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim, a path of those you have blessed, not those whom you are displeased with or those you have led astray. And the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they had many questions on this surah because it was so important. And one of the questions was on the ending of the surah, where we say, not those who Allah is displeased with or those who have been led astray. The companions of the Prophet ﷺ asked, who is this in reference to? Who are we mentioning here when we recite these verses? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that as for those who have been led astray, these are the Christians, the people of Isa alayhi salam. And as for those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with or angry with, these are al-Yahud, the Jews, or the people of Musa alayhi salam, or also known as the Bani Israel. And I want to take just a minute to reflect on the story of the Bani Israel, because the Bani Israel are really a very interesting group of people. They are a community that is mentioned countless times throughout the Quran. You know, sometimes we have communities or prophets that are mentioned in select passages or select surahs, like the surah of Yusuf alayhi salam. But the Bani Israel are special in that they are mentioned throughout the Quran. In Surah Al-Baqarah, in Surah Al-Ma'idah, in Surah Taha, in Surah Al-Qasas, all the way to the end of the Quran in Surah Al-Nazi'at. Right, they are mentioned or they're referenced to. So literally from cover to cover, the Bani Israel are mentioned. Why is that? Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continuously mention or reference this story? What significance does it have? It's because of the lessons that we can draw from the stories from just two main similarities. The first similarity is a similarity between the Prophet, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Both were prophets, both were messengers, both were given revelation, both were given an extended period of time with their people. And the second similarity is a similarity between us, the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Bani Israel. Just like us, they were given a prophet. Just like us, they were given a revelation. Just like us, they were blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like us, they were favored by Allah. And just like us, they were honored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But where they went wrong was what they did with these favors. And so we learned from the Prophet ﷺ and Surah Fatiha that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is displeased with the Bani Israel. But Fatiha doesn't explain why. This comes in the next surah, Surah Al-Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Bani Israel. Ya Bani Israel, quru ni'mati allati an'amtu alaykum. O children of Israel, remember my favors upon you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by reminding how indebted the Bani Israel are to him. Because if they feel indebted, maybe they'll ask, how can we show gratitude? And what is our ibadah, our worship, except a way to show gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't to just get yourself to pray, it's to get yourself to want to pray. Right? What good is obeying and complying if there is no sincerity behind that action? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of the motivation. And the motivation is to realize that we wake up in debt every single day, and our ibadah is what fulfills that debt. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to mention the many, many blessings that He has given the Bani Israel. He says, وَإِذْ نَجَّيْنَاكُمْ مِنْ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ يَسُومُونَكُمْ سُوءَ الْعَذَابِ. The Bani Israel were people who were tormented and tortured by the people of Fir'aun. Who rescued them? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rescued them. Right? يُذَبِّحُونَ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَيَسْتَحْيُونَ نِسَاءَكُمْ. They were slaughtering their sons, and they were keeping their women. Who rescued them? Allah rescued them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions when the Bani Israel were running from the people of Fir'aun, and they were running and they had nowhere to go. And so what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do? وَإِذْ بِكُمُ الْبَحْرَ فَأَنْجَيْنَاكُمْ وَأَنْقَذْنَاكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَنْظُرُونَ. And remember when we parted the sea and we rescued you. And we rescued you from the people who were trying to torment you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, وَإِذْ آتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ وَالْفُرْقَانَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَهْتَدُونَ. Remember when we gave Musa the description, so that perhaps you may be guided. And the Bani Israel, they were people who faced many issues during their lifetime. They faced famine, they faced a shortage of water, drought. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds them of how He helped them in these times. وَظَلَّلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْغَمَامَ وَأَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكُمُ الْمَنَّ وَالسَّلْوَىٰ. Remember when we shaded you with the clouds, and we gave you food to eat from. And when we didn't have water, we told Musa, فَقُلْ نَضْرِبْ بِعَصَاكَ الْحَجَرَ. Strike the rock with your staff. And so what came out of the rock? Water came out of the rock. So much so that it was enough for their 12 tribes, one for each tribe. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rescued them from Fir'aun. He parted the sea for them. He gave them revelation. He shaded them. He gave them food. He gave them water in the desert. Shouldn't the Bani Israel feel a sort of indebtedness? Shouldn't they recognize these favors as favors from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Shouldn't they turn that gratitude into the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So how did the Bani Israel respond? How did the Bani Israel respond to all these blessings? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when He called Musa up to the mountain, وَإِذْ وَعَدْنَا مُوسَى 40 لَيْلًا, when He called them for 40 nights, what did they do? ثُمَّ اتَّخَذْتُمُ الْعِجْلَ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ وَأَنْتُمْ ظَالِمُونَ. That they worshipped the calf in His absence, and they acted wrongfully. And when they were told to sacrifice a cow, they made excuses, and they questioned Allah, and they questioned His messenger, and they did anything they could do to not obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And throughout this entire process, Allah was so gracious. He forgave them, He pardoned them, but still they refused to believe until they set a condition. They told Musa, وَإِذْ قُلْتُمْ يَا مُوسَى لَن نُؤْمِنَ لَكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا, that we will not believe in Allah until we see Him. This was their arrogance. This was their stubbornness. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was somebody who was in need of the Bani Israel. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes clear, وَمَا ظَلَمُونَا وَلَكِنْ كَانُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ يَظْلِمُونَ, that these people, they did not wrong Allah. They did not wrong Musa alayhi salam. They wronged themselves. And so to deal with somebody patiently is a good thing. It's a good thing to be patient with people. But at some point when that person takes advantage of your patience, it becomes unfair. It becomes unjust. And the reality of the situation is that the Bani Israel, they failed. They failed. But even in these ayat, and this is the main takeaway that we should have, even in these ayat, did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send these ayat down to the Bani Israel? Did He send the ayat down to Musa alayhi salam? Or did He send it to us? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us the story? Is it to make us feel as though we are better than the Bani Israel? Or is it so that this message should serve as a lesson for us, a warning for us, a reminder for us that there was a people just like you. There was a people that had a revelation, they had a prophet, they were blessed, they were favored by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were just like you. But they denied the truth. They rejected the truth. And this was the consequence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He took a contract with the Bani Israel. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِيثَاقَ بَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ لَا تَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ. What was in this contract? To not worship anyone except Allah. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ. To be kind to your parents, to your relatives, to the orphans, to the needy. وَقُولُوا لِلنَّاسِ حُسْنًا. To speak kindly to all the people. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ. And to establish the prayer and to establish the zakat. Doesn't this sound familiar to us? Doesn't this sound similar to our Sharia? But what did the Bani Israel do? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, ثُمَّ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, that most of them turned away except for a few of them. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, have we turned away like the Bani Israel turned away? Have we established our prayer, or do we say, I can make it up later? Do we give up our wealth, or do we say, I work hard for that? Do we follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? Do we speak kindly to the people, or do we say, no, that's just the sunnah? Right? These are the questions we need to be asking ourselves, knowing the story and knowing the outcome of the Bani Israel. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Inshallah, I'll just end with this. We take a lot of pride in being from the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, the last Prophet of Allah. We take a lot of pride in defending and upholding the dignity of Islam. We take a lot of pride in preserving and protecting the Quran. Yet these are all things that, although they are very, very, very important, they don't just protect us from being like the Bani Israel. They're very important, but if we don't attribute these blessings back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we don't benefit from them, there's something that doesn't differentiate us from the Bani Israel. Because as Muslims, we have to train ourselves to look inwards. We have to train ourselves to look at our faults and to look and to do a self-muhasabah. Because at the end of the day, this is a lifelong journey, this is a lifelong battle. And even for a second, if that arrogance, if that stubbornness enters our hearts, then know to recognize it as a disease that needs a cure. إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَمَلَائِكَتَهُ يُصَلُّونَ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا صَلُّوا عَلَيْهِ وَسَلِّمُوا تَسْلِيمًا اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وأذل الشرك والمشركين ودمر أعداء الدين. اللهم انصر المسلمين في فلسطين وفي غزة وفي كل مكان يا رب العالمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.